Hello and welcome to the Lyder Side podcast. After a short but admittedly failed attempt to keep a YouTube show running, we decided to try podcasting. After an even shorter but much more clearly failed attempt at that, we decided to take a look at ourselves in the mirror. After adjusting our hair, we noticed that the problem with media today is the noise. There are so many shows, podcasts, and public opinions out there that there was no sense in adding yet another voice to the cacophony of calamity. So what we decided to do was to help distill down the best of the best, to take some of the smartest, most well-spoken people's work and to parrot it for our own sordid gain.
Well, that's not exactly how I would describe it. I think what we're trying to do is take dense, more academic ideas and break them down for our listeners, hoping to maybe show a more Midwestern audience why academic work is not only important, but practical for your life.
Whatever you say, Josh, but here's how we do it. Each episode, we select a person, show, documentary, podcast, or book to look at, just basically at any text at all. We're going to look at it backwards and forwards and try to convince you that it's worth your time to check it out.
That's right.
All right, so what we do first is we break down the context, basically the background information about whatever we're talking about. Then we provide a brief, but not completely revealing summary of the text. After that, we take a look at why it's worth your time to watch and what's so special about it. And then, let's be honest, we're probably going to get 2 or 3 opinions in there after that. But then the last thing we're going to try to do is to provide a small silver lining, some sort of, lighter side to the topic, right?
Right.
All right, let's get into it. Hey everybody, and welcome back over to the Lyder Side podcast. My name is Jared Lyder, and my Josh's name is Brother. So what we're going to talk about this week is Tristan Harris and his documentary. Now, he was not the director of it. He was the star of the documentary and provided most of the content for it. The Social Dilemma, which aired on Netflix about a year ago, that really gets into this problem that we all know is happening, where our information is being sold to third-party companies by giant tech companies. Also gets into the problem of our attention and how these tech companies are, vying for our attention, lobbying for our attention, paying for our attention, selling our attention, all that stuff. So all these issues that we're all aware of, that we all freak out about, talk about in coffee shops and bars all the time. This is the best text to look at, to get some questions answered, but more importantly, I think, to kind of contextualize just how big and bad this problem is. So I guess the questions maybe our audience might have is, who is Tristan Harris? What was the Social Dilemma all about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to start with Tristan Harris as a person, I mean, he's been around in the game for not quite 10 years, I would say, in terms of bringing these issues to light. He's obviously been in the tech game for a while, worked for Google, kind of made a presentation on Google a while back, or for Google, I should say, not about what they were doing and kind of their moral responsibility, to say it as briefly as you can state it.
Right. So basically what he did, and we're going to use words like basically a lot. So just be ready for a lot of hedging on this podcast. We never claim to be smooth. Basically what he did was he sent out a presentation to everyone who worked at Google that basically said, hey, we have the potential with how we design our technology to make it more ethical or less ethical, where we can force people to constantly be checking their emails and constantly be watching our videos, or we can provide people a higher sense of control in their lives with how we design technology. It can be more about the user and less about selling their data. So he kind of put this whole presentation together. Everyone at Google was like, oh my gosh, hey, I get you. I felt the same way. Even the CEOs were impressed with his work, and then nothing happened. Basically, not a single change was made at Google. So that kind of launched his crusade against all these big companies from the outside.
Right. So, I mean, obviously at that point, he quit the company. He left the company and started kind of doing his, like you said, this crusade on his own. Was on, before this was really, really mainstream, was on some shows, was on 60 Minutes, like you had told me before we started this, which I didn't even know a while back. I guess he was on that. I knew he had done some talk shows and stuff like that in the past, but just hadn't garnered quite the momentum that he needed. Fast forward to last year and the finishing of their documentary, The Social Dilemma. And since then, obviously Social Dilemma blew up according to Netflix. Of course, there's no way to objectively check Netflix's views, but they say, they claim a lot of people watched it. And so, ever since then, he's also done, throughout 2020, quite a few podcasts, including many of the biggest ones. Like you said, he was on Armchair Expert with Dax, and he was on the Joe Rogan Experience. So he was on, and those are just two of many.
And we're trying to get him for this one as well.
Right.
Like he's trying to get the biggest podcast in. So I'm assuming we'll get a call from him
any day now.
Any day. We actually haven't put a call out. That's how big we feel we are. That's the confidence that we have.
He'll call us. He'll call us.
Oh, for sure, absolutely. So I think we need to, for a split second, in our little bit of context, but also getting into a little bit of summary, we need to differentiate him a little bit in what he said on some of these podcasts and his strict ethical code and his talk about designing ethical tech. There was another part to The Social Dilemma which was super interesting, which was actually the founders and creators of things like Snapchat and Pinterest and some of these other companies who were talking about just how bad it was, how much the tech that they were working on was really designed to keep you there. So maybe let's transition into that summary piece. Let's briefly kind of summarize the documentary itself. Not necessarily everything Tristan has said. So what was the document? I know you just rewatched a bit of it before we started here. So what was the documentary about?
Right. I mean, it's hard to do too much summarizing because we do this partially because we want you to watch it. We want to contextualize it, but we definitely want you to watch it as well. It's also hard to do too much summary without kind of stepping on some of the problem solution or the problem causation things we want to get into. But to do it in very simple terms, it's really does a good job of explaining how this problem came about, and the problem being the fact that we as consumers of social media are essentially the monetized product, and therefore everything has to be tailored to us, which essentially ends up manipulating us and causing, it really gets into the problems that causes.
So yeah, meaning in the same way that we know with television, like before cable, like just basic television, bunny ears, we were the product being sold to advertisement agencies who were paying this television studios.
Right.
So it's basically the exact same problem, the exact same situation, but in one sense where we had a control over it. It was small. Everyone watched the exact same advertisements. It has exploded into this just minefield where the technology that's operating is more powerful than even the people in control of it, let alone the basic consumer.
Right.
That's right.
Exactly. So, it really becomes a big issue when, the combination of everybody having their own device, in most cases multiple of these devices, and artificial intelligence create this perfect storm of not only are you the product, but the problem with you being the product is everything is so easily customizable to what will keep your attention. And that's kind of the crux of the whole thing, right? Is attention. And that is what they're selling. That is what it causes this grander manipulation, time stealing, whatever problem then you want to identify as the big issue. We could branch out into all the different problems this causes between stealing your time, manipulating your spending habits, manipulating your views about things, or even leading you down dark paths in terms of misinformation and kind of conspiracy, extremism beliefs is a big problem there.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why this documentary was so incredible. And it's so worth your time, because we were joking before the podcast started where it's like the most important thing we've ever watched where you didn't actually learn a single piece of new information. It did explain things we already think we know, right, but it chased all of those different individual threads. It went all the way down the rabbit hole on every single one of them. How it makes us more divided, how it makes people, give up their own attention when they otherwise wouldn't, and It's just how it kind of can destroy a family or how it can affect a family. It went through every single one of these things everyone always talks about. It followed the thread to the end. And I think that was really powerful, but also like really obvious. Like by the end, it's like they weren't being dramatic. Everything they were saying was right on point. We've all seen it. We've seen it in our own lives. We've seen it with the people we work with. You know, tech has changed everything about what it means to be spending a moment doing anything, really. Like, you know, what are you doing with your time and your attention?
I think before we move on, the one biggest difference, I think, or the one biggest distinction I think that the documentary makes that I think might be a little different than what, you know, Jim and Sue think is wrong with big tech right now is the fact that, you know, you hear a lot from just your average person about, like, they're worried about you stealing your data, right? And I don't think people really, when people hear that, I think a lot of people who aren't really connected to this think that, oh, they're worried about identity theft. They're worried about people having your address or knowing who you're friends with or, you know, having your phone number. People are worried about that stuff when that's really just such a small, almost non-existent part of the issue. It's not about that. It's about them knowing your thought patterns, what you want, what keeps your attention, what you're willing to spend time looking at, what you're willing to spend your money on. Those are the issues. Your personal thoughts, wants, habits are what is being stolen, and that is what's truly dangerous about this situation, and what is the crux of what they're trying to show you in this documentary.
Right, and how it would get you to do things that you otherwise wouldn't do, because a really savvy, almost intellectual argument back against us and back against Tristan Harris is, well, what's so wrong with all this, right? So why don't we just start living the life online? Like, you know, why don't we commit to it? Why haven't we just started living the plugged in life where we basically get 90% or more of our satisfaction in life online? Well, the really simple and obvious fact is that it's not working. Like, statistic after statistic tells us that people are getting more anxious, more depressed, less satisfied with their individual lives. So it's basically like you're being forced or you're being, you know, convinced to keep looking at something that is genuinely harming you. And I think I can go one step further than that. You're being forced to look at something that most people would actively look at and say, oh, I hate how much time I spend on my phone. Right. Like nobody is happy about this, right? It's like the Joe Biden of, you know, tech stories. It's like, yeah, we voted for him, but like, oh boy, it's not the most exciting choice. So, you know, that's a huge part of this that we're going to get into. We've got a lot of opinions on it. There's one more thing I want to kind of say in summary, which is that throughout the whole documentary, they used a little kind of like metaphor, but it's not really a metaphor because it's actually what happens. So while the experts were talking, or in between times the experts were talking, they would cut to this sort of fake story about three basically AI bots where they were inside a machine. And essentially what they were doing was helping to build a better and better basically ragdoll, would you call it?
Right. I mean, that's what they, you know, avatar, ragdoll, you know, was the metaphors they used, you know, was what they used to compare it to.
Right. And with every new piece of information, and we have to understand what pieces of information we're talking about. Information like when you wake up, you know, who your phone is in close contact with, what things you search, what things you spend more time scrolling by when you look. All these different things build a better and better version of you. And there are a lot of people out there, and I'm sure of this, who don't think that's true. Who think that if you just looked at what you do online, a big tech company couldn't get a good representation of who you are. And I'm sorry to say that that just isn't true. You know, time after time, if you look at people's habits, if you look at what they spend their time doing, it doesn't take that long to track a pretty consistent record of who the family is. One quick side story is I'm a teacher, and I have a coworker who one time made students for 2 weeks track every place they went, you know, basically throughout the 2 weeks. And essentially what happened was the kids found themselves tracing the same path over and over and over and over again, to a point where the teacher could reasonably predict where a student would be at a certain time, at a certain part of the day. So just imagine a giant billion-dollar tech company selling that information to another big, you know, thriving business. It gets scary what they could potentially do with that information to persuade you.
Right. And so I think that leads us into the first kind of subject we're going to talk about, which is let's dissect the problem a little bit more. So I think that's a really good representation of the problem because, as you might say, so kind of a so what type situation, and the point is kind of I'm still making decisions for myself, right? I'm my own person making decisions for myself. If I choose to be in this system, then I have to deal with the results. But the issue is way more complicated than that, because not only do we live in a world where it's very, very difficult, especially for young people, to avoid these things. Even just, Google is one of the biggest perpetrators, and how do you get through life as an adult without a Google account? Even for work purposes, even if it's not for...
Right, and maybe this is the time to say this. We're not a podcast that is about to lob out some lame argument that everyone should just turn off their phones, right? That's not reasonable. That's not the solution to this at all. And if you think that's the solution to this, I don't want to call you simple-minded because I don't think that's fair. I just think you're not paying attention to the culture of kids, the culture of work, the culture of business. I mean, it's just not possible.
And so where I'm kind of going with this is the issue of psychology. And people tend to believe that we have way, way more control over our brains than we actually do, right? The human, we like to think, I'm going to make this decision if I choose to do something or not to do something, or to pay attention to something or not pay attention. That is my decision. I am making that. But, the truth is, and you can look at study after study that will show you that the human brain is so incredibly manipulatable. Making up words on the spot here. We can be manipulated so easily that you can think that you're making all these decisions because you want to make them, but when you are fully fed into this system that is showing you everything based on what it wants you to think or what it is most beneficial for you to think, then you lose a little bit of that decision making that you think that you have.
Right, but let me jump in here because that's not what it does, right? And it doesn't care about that, right? It's not trying, the technology couldn't care less, right, if what you're looking at is most beneficial for you, which is what's so scary about all this. Right. It's not your version of your perfect life versus the computer's version of your perfect life. It's a machine that is built to keep your attention, right, being compared to what you would otherwise want to do with your time. So, like, the example that Tristan Harris keeps using in the video, and I really was excited to talk about this, was he compares it to a car crash, right? The fact that tech oftentimes can capitalize monetarily on your willingness to look at a car crash. I mean, every single one of us out there, unless maybe you're a sociopath, doesn't want there to be another car crash as long as you live, right? I would be so happy if there were no more car crashes. That doesn't mean when I get on the highway and there's a car crash, I'm not going to look at it. Those are two completely different parts of my brain, parts of my being. So when you hop online and you think about, and I know Josh is going to talk about this later, but you talk about conspiracy videos that will hold somebody's attention for 11 minutes. That doesn't mean that person, A, wants there to be a conspiracy, B, thinks that there are conspiracies, C, thinks that video is even credible at all. But what starts to happen is it slowly pulls your attention closer and closer. But it doesn't even have to be that dramatic, right? Like, just think of a teenage, boy or girl sitting, in class or between class periods. What might hold their attention on Instagram is pictures of beautiful people, right? Pictures of people living at the beach, people living these moments that are so perfect. And, they just absorb that time and time and time again. And even positive things like that, nobody would choose to spend their time looking at or watching, but it will hold your attention because there's that jealousy or there's that competitiveness or there's that longing for that life. So it doesn't even have to be conspiracy videos. All of this stuff can be incredibly dangerous to look at again and again and again. And it has nothing to do with where you want to spend your time, right? That's why the car crash analogy is so powerful. Just because it takes your time and you're going to look at it has nothing to do with what you want to do.
Right. And I mean, they touch on a lot of specifics. We kind of talked about things in generalities until you just kind of started to dive in a little bit to specifics. And they mentioned a few specifics, and those are a couple of the dangerous ones that Tristan likes to talk about. You talk about depression in young people, right? And I mean that stems from what you're talking about. It's nothing, your Instagram, or I guess to some degree your Facebook feed or whatever, is going to show you beautiful people because it's what's going to keep your attention on the screen. So that leads to young, predominantly young women at the time at the moment, but young men too, having higher depression rates. You talk about YouTube's famous algorithm that keeps eyes on the screen,
keeps you clicking on the next video that they recommend.
Right, and those recommendations are essentially exclusively made to keep your attention. And I mean, what's going to keep your attention more? Even a reasonable person is going to be more glued to the screen of extreme content than they are an hour-long conversation delving into the gray areas of a really dense and difficult topic, right? So you're leading to everybody, but this problem again is conflated in young people. You come up with this problem where everybody's eyes are constantly on something extreme, something radical.
Well, then even you and I sometimes can disagree on like what the biggest problem is here, although we do agree that they're both huge problems. Like, it's not even necessarily the conspiracy videos you go down. Like, I will literally sit there and open YouTube, and I am constantly getting Conan O'Brien pinned against Seth Meyers, getting pinned against Weekend Update SNL. Like, it's just these random talk shows competing for my attention. And by the end, did I really care that Matthew McConaughey spent 14 minutes talking to Conan? No, I definitely did not care. And I'm mad at myself after those 14 minutes are over because I didn't want to be doing that for those 14 minutes. Now, that is where some people might be willing to say, okay, you need to put your own, line in the sand, which I kind of have, and we could talk about what I've done on my own technology, but I don't think anyone cares. But the point is that even when it's not wackadoo, crazy conspiracy videos, your time can still be taken from you in a way that television just couldn't, because television isn't queuing up the next thing that's kind of interesting to you. You have to look and see a title that you're genuinely interested in watching and tune in at that time to see it. So like that's what's this endless stream of content that companies have to try to send at you to steal your time. That's what's scary to me.
Right. And I mean, with your TV metaphor, I mean, with that comparison, the safe thing about that is TV it is fighting for views, but I mean, obviously it's fighting for everyone's views, right? So they're making content that is potentially pleasing to everybody, which means it's blah. It's not dangerous. It's often not good. It's just everybody kind of look at it, and that's it. The danger is when you have content being not created, but picked for you and to keep your attention. And this content gets more and more extreme.
Which sounds like a utopia, right? It sounds like a paradise, but it ends up becoming the exact opposite thing.
Right.
We will never again have the streets barren because the final episode of MASH is about to air. Like, that's never going to happen again. But it's really kind of interesting to talk about because what's so beautiful about that is MASH creates a story and the writers continue on with that story, right? They don't change their opinions based on the average American person. So they keep writing a story that they think is good, and what happens is people's opinions shift and change, and you get totally different blue-collar, white-collar workers, people from different ethnicities, backgrounds, all this stuff, enjoying the same piece of content. Instead of, you take all those divisions that make us who we are, and you send content down the channel to each individual difference of a person. It just makes us live in such more factioned, fractured, spaces that really start to build walls around who you are and who you think you are.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, you've got the time stealing issue. For me, I mean, obviously, that one of the first things I'll always go to is something political or something in that sphere. And I mean,
welcome to Shock Jock Radio.
The biggest issue for me, and you see it, we hear about it about Facebook now. It's the same thing with Twitter, and even like YouTube is a huge problem with this too, because so many people are getting political news off of places like Facebook and YouTube, or their political information, or their political opinions off of opinion hosts, editorializers, whatever you want to call them, on these sites. And the issue is, not only is this usually vastly oversimplified information, but in addition to being vastly oversimplified, it's always going to be extremely partisan, because we would much rather watch something that makes us seem right. I mean, anybody's going to click, almost anybody is going to click on a 90-second video that reinforces their already held beliefs, than somebody who's going to click on an hour-long video delving into the gray area of an extremely nuanced topic.
Well, and it's the nuanced topics that become so hilarious, right? Like, just because we know climate change exists doesn't mean we know exactly how it's affecting, how it's progressing every single year. So you take something that needs scientifically researched, and depending on how you type it into Google, or depending on where you live in the country, it's going to give you a tremendously different result. Or flat out opinion-based issues like abortion or gun control. Like, how could you ever Google something that's going to help you understand that topic? You're not, because you're going to put whatever way you phrase the question is always going to be on whatever side you're feeling. That's just human nature, right?
Right. And I mean, places like Facebook and YouTube are going to give you the ones that are entertaining, right? They're going to give you the ones that kept people's eyes, which are almost never going to be the best, smartest ones, right? It's never going to be that.
No, they're going to be the loudest, most obnoxious ones, because even if you hate something, hate views matter. What happens here, and this is a huge difference between you and me, is this has caused you to do, I think, a really good job, if I can give you the only compliment I think I've ever given you in our lives. It's led you to do a pretty good job of using both sources, listening to conservative stuff, listening to liberal stuff, and trying to use primary sources, what people actually said, to get to the facts of the case. What it's led me to do, and this is what it has led a sea of people to do, and this is something Tristan Harris mentions in the documentary, it's led me to essentially stop believing facts at all, right? Like, I don't mean facts about myself or facts that, like, are clear that I can see, but like when it comes to Trump, or when it comes to politics or this or that or the other, like, it's just hard to trust anything. And, at least I have some safeguards where I, know if I need to vote, or if I need to do this, I can seek out some good information. But I don't blame some of the people who sit at home and just constantly think their side is right, because it's really hard to know what to believe anymore.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's extremely difficult, and one of the biggest problems is it requires a decent amount of effort, right? Well, what is effortless about finding out information is stuff that pops through your Twitter feed, your Facebook page, your Instagram feed, or your YouTube suggestions, right? That takes no effort. That stuff pops right up there. And that's the problem, is that stuff is so incredibly unreliable 90% of the time. And so it actually takes effort to then, okay, well, now I've got to go out and find a real source to get this information. And guess what? A real source probably wrote a 2-page article on it. And it's not a really nice meme or a 30-second YouTube video. It's a 2-page article in a well-respected journal or something like that.
Right, that doesn't even, cite the implications of what someone might have said. It just strictly lists the facts of an individual case. And it's really hard to want to look at that as much as it is to listen to, at best, Tucker Carlson explain what happened today in news. Like, it's so much easier to do, to watch the thing that's inflammatory or that perfectly confirms what you already believed.
Right. And I mean, the worst part, now that you mentioned that, the worst part about that is
Tucker Carlson.
Well, as in terms of, greater, philosophical, moral things, then yes, Tucker Carlson is the answer. But talking in terms of this problem is the fact that you would be surprised how often, if you watch MSNBC or Fox News and you watch one of the editorializers like Tucker Carlson, how often their stories are pulled from like social media trending stories. Like, that's where even some of your news sources are getting their stories from, are some of these ridiculous and at times completely false things off of trending topics on Twitter and Facebook.
Right. And in a little bit of a more maybe esoteric, sort of like way highfalutin-y sort of way, it does at least kind of, get at the interesting question of what is news anyway. like where did news come from? Other than something that is earth-shattering, huge news, like what? Who picks the stories anyway? So like it's almost shedding light on a problem that's been a problem for centuries.
Right.
But it's definitely not like revealing the problem and solving it at all.
Right.
It's definitely making it worse.
I mean, 24 hour, if you're at all familiar with the situation, like 24-hour news, at like these channels like Fox News, MSNBC, they haven't been CNN, they haven't been around for that long, right? I mean, they came into existence really during our lifetimes. I'm not even 30 yet, and this with that kind of came the editorializing that we see on this, which it used to just be like, hey, here's what happened today. The classic George Stephanopoulos or Walter Cronkite just telling you, to go back further, to tell you, like, this is what happened. And now it's like, well, let's give Tucker Carlson an hour to tell you how to feel about what happened. And that's kind of where and what we're seeing with social media is almost take that problem and personalize it to every single person in the country, shorten it, give you less real facts, and dumb it down even further.
Right.
And so you take the danger of a political, if you're on one side, Tucker Carlson, if you're on the other side, Rachel Maddow will give you somebody like that. You take the danger that you already see in a person like that, and you make it a million times worse.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then even like, I think it's important to also mention, this is something that Tristan Harris gets at, is you're talking about the feelings of an entire country or an entire world. So you only have to shift the feelings by a couple degrees. I mean, if you can get an entire country to think 2 degrees differently, that's going to have lasting impacts that can affect elections, relationships, families, all this stuff. And, I think it's funny what you said, Tucker Carlson telling you how to feel about it. Sometimes it doesn't even have to go that far. Sometimes just knowing that people like Rush Limbaugh, Rachel Maddow, or Tucker Carlson feel the way that they do makes you think, okay, there are people out there who feel that way. I kind of lean that way. I see where they're coming from. You start to create your understanding of politics or reality out of these puppets. And it just becomes, the more we normalize it, the worse and worse our society gets.
Right. And I mean, to really just cap off this, because we're kind of beating a dead horse a little bit with this subject, is just the fact that this is what leads to this kind of further separation of anybody in intellectual space, right? We could say politics left and right. We could say thoughts about science, because there's a lot, kind of like quasi-scientific information or false science has exploded in the last 10 years. Why? Mainly because of oversimplified Facebook posts by people who are kind of pretending to be experts or whatever, and YouTube conspiracy videos. Why do you think why do you think all of a sudden Flat Earth came back after, 100 years of not being a thing, or not being a mainstream thing? All of a sudden it's everywhere. And, same thing with a lot of stuff. And that leads to that further and further separation of people in intellectual space, because if you're searching things under like a democratic mindset, so say you're a Democrat looking at Democratic videos on YouTube, YouTube is going to push you further and further to the left, simply because it will keep your eyes hooked longer, right? Moderate left information is not going to be as exciting, even if you don't identify as an extreme left. That's what's still going to keep your eye on the screen, statistically speaking, and you're going to get pushed further and further in that direction. And it is inevitable that the human brain is going to start believing some of those things, or is going to start at least questioning your former ideas. And so this can push you farther to the left, farther to the right, farther away from science in many different directions. And so that kind of is the extremism that is dangerous under this system, because we're just far more manipulatable than we believe we are.
Right, because our brains are pushing us to survive and to thrive. Our brains are not pushing us to become robots and get all of the facts of all of the cases and to put together a perfect worldview that has no hypocrisies embedded in it. The human brain can hold so many hypocritical stances. That's one of the beautiful things about the brain. So, I think maybe we've kind of touched all around this, but we need to at least attack it head on for a portion of this conversation, which is just how social media so easily puts people into two different camps. You know, the kind of the Trump part of this conversation, kind of the radical left part of this conversation. You know, how easily social media divides us as a nation, because there really is a red-blue problem here, even though it's not just one direction.
Yeah. And I mean that problem, obviously, like I just said, it splits us in directions. You just pick a subject, right, and it's gonna split us in two sides regardless, and that most of the time ends up boiling back to politics or general beliefs about the country. We can split it up however we want, but I mean the issue is essentially in a short YouTube video, which is what people want, what people need to do to keep our attention, unfortunately, is short YouTube videos, or a quick Facebook post, which is going to be a paragraph long, a couple at most, or a meme on Facebook, the quickest way to move information on Twitter, Instagram, any of those places.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm saying is how logical it is, right? So let's think about how this happens. So you're a mother of a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old, right? And you spend most of your time shuffling your kids back to a school in the school district that you live in. And on your Facebook page, you are friends with all the other basketball parents. And you start to very quickly realize, because you are all geographically from about the same place, you all start to feel a very particular way about a certain topic. And then let's say, a big political discussion comes up, or a big this or that. Everyone in that community tends to lean a particular way. So everyone starts to search the same stuff. And then you're all connected together. Facebook knows you're connected together. And the whole thing starts to churn, because it's like, hey, this is a group that we can, attack with these type of political ads. And then it just gets worse and worse. And you think about every single in-group, not just for every single person, but every different group that just one person can be in. And you just think it's hard to understand the just size of this problem until you start to think about the 2 billion people who use YouTube and the 2.7 billion people who use Facebook. Like, it's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, the manipulation of the in-groups, and I mean, forming these in-groups is basic, human psychology. We want to do it. It's. I mean, Tristan Harris says he talks about it a little bit in the. I watched the Joe Rogan one. You watched the Dax Shepard one. Mm-hmm. I don't know. So I don't know if he talked about it with Dax, but he definitely talked about it with Joe, which was essentially. The fact that our brains are hardwired this certain way, and these taking hardline opinions with your in-group is something that is hardwired into our brain, right? And so we'd like to think we have the power to kind of not be taken in by that manipulation and think for ourselves. But the point is, your brain isn't, whether you think that or not, your brain isn't wired that way. And we can really be forced into these mindsets a lot easier than you think you can. And it's a matter of like your brain versus a highly advanced AI algorithm that is channeling everything you see, and we think we have a lot more control over them than we do.
Right, for sure. So this is the part where we try as best as we can to maybe talk about some silver linings here, or to try to talk about how this could change. We already said that this is not about some sort of turn off your cell phones, stop participating in social media. That's just not possible or realistic at all. So, I think Josh mentioned at the top, one of the truly great, positives from this might be that a lot of people watched this documentary, and a lot of people listened to the Joe Rogan podcast, and a lot of people listened to the Dax Shepard podcast. And, that means that this idea is not only out there, but is well received by a lot of different people. I mean, I work with 16, 17, and 18-year-olds, and every time you bring up social media, no matter how much they use it, because boy, they use it a lot, they all hate it. Like, they don't say positive things about it. This notion that kids are just addicted to it and love it is not true. The kids just use it because it's part of their social fabric. Everyone hates this stuff. And the more we can, be watching people talk about how much we hate it and why specifically we hate it, these companies are bound to change some things.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the positive hope on it. And like, unfortunately, this is not exactly the greatest topic to start with in terms of finding the silver lining or finding the lighter side. I mean, even Tristan Harris, when he's been asked like, can you think of any positive? Like, what's the good at the end of the tunnel here? And he even has a hard time really coming up with anything good. I mean, the thing he goes back to is what, you want to say something?
No, but that might be the only critique. So I've watched him in a lot of stuff, and I'm not quite sure. And I know that he understands the scope of it a lot more than I do. So I'm sure it feels tiring and tiresome and taxing and all those T words. But, I do think that it wouldn't be that hard if we all start to, kind of get on the rallying call of, I hate being manipulated. I hate being manipulated. I feel like tech companies can pretty quickly find a way to still advertise to us,
right,
and still like I just don't think we're that far removed from kind of a revolution or a revolt happening, and the tech companies wising up really quick because they still want to sell a lot of advertisements on their software or whatever.
Right. I mean, the two, like you said, the silver lining is definitely, I would say, the exposure, right? How many people are now getting to know this problem, right? Knowledge is power, and between this documentary, between, like Jared said, all the podcast appearances and some of the biggest podcasts there are, and that's what he would say is like this. So many more people know about this than ever before, and are getting more and more informed. But then the negative side is you're fighting two of the most powerful forces, which is addiction and capitalism, right? And neither of us is anti-capitalism, but the point is, while capitalism, arguably is the best way to run a government or run an economy, there are negatives to it. Obviously, it's not a perfect way to live, and the negative to it is the fact that when somebody finds a product or a service that is vehemently against our best interests but still makes a ton of money, how do you can say all day that if enough people know about this problem and are like, hey, I'm sick of being manipulated, the companies will change that, but there's a decent chance they don't change that unless they have a fiscal reason to do so.
No, absolutely, which is why we are calling on all major tech manufacturers, all you brilliant people out there. What someone needs to do is start occasionally I like to go off on wild ideas. I'm the creative type. But what I think needs to happen is that someone needs to create a model for a really, really fun, user-friendly social media service where essentially the ads are like... One of the biggest problems of Facebook is how cheaply the ads come up. Like the whole thing just looks like a minefield. It looks like the ticker tape on a Fox News. I think what someone is going to figure out how to do is almost like YouTube, where a video or something has to play every little while. If someone were to build a really well-made, clean, user-friendly social media service, and the ads were more, hey, you've been on it for 15 minutes, you must watch this, there's no getting around it, and they were, better. So like, I just think over time, what's going to happen is people are going to find something, and maybe not that, but I think a social media service can be designed where the ads are less intrusive, but still really prevalent. And, people will just, I don't know. That's not going to work, is it? No, probably not.
No, it wasn't, because you're kind of describing YouTube, and YouTube is one of the biggest perpetrators. But I'll help you out here and jump in, because the biggest thing we need is is a company that's willing to do it essentially without the manipulation, right? Without using your data against you, without showing you what to do, right? The advertising isn't necessarily the problem if the company just has the morals to not influence what you see, to give you a more of a place. And actually, Apple has said they are working on something like that. And Apple gets a lot of crap for a lot of things, and they have been a perpetrator in this problem. They absolutely have. But especially in the last 5 years or so, they've been an outspoken company trying to kind of reverse the problem. They've been big on extra security on their devices. They charge too much. They are a cult of a company that, to say they have a culture that makes people buy products. There's a lot of negative things you can say, but they are using that power, that money, to try and kind of design an alternate type system.
Well, I guess that's what I mean. So if I can try to like fix my utter failure there, what I'm saying is I think a social media service could come along where people get used to using it as a really savvy tool. That's what I'm saying. So that if you watch the documentary, which we obviously encourage you to do and have been, what they say is that technology has stopped being a useful tool. We think of it as a tool. We think of a smartphone as a tool, but the apps and these things that we've added to these smartphones are not tools because they actually steal our attention. They take something from us instead of adding something to it. What I guess I was trying to describe was people could fall in love with a new form of social media where they just hopped on when they wanted to, made those good connections, saw the funny stuff, but since they weren't being pulled and pushed and manipulated, that they would fall in love with using it, getting off of it, living a healthier, more well-adjusted life. That's kind of what I was trying to describe.
Right. Which is, Tristan does talk about that too, at least with Joe. He definitely talks about like, hey, the solution is, the kind of solution, the companies just need to be moral enough, which, it's a crazy thing to ask if there's money on the line for a company to just make the quote-unquote moral decision, which is, this kind of brings us full circle to what he said in that Google presentation when he worked for them. He was like, hey, we have the power to manipulate all of these people. We have to make the decision that we are going to use that for the positive, or essentially not use that manipulation to the extent of what we can do. Right? That's what he was saying. We just need to make the moral decision here. And Google just didn't really listen to him. And Facebook did the exact same thing, and they're, at least one of the major Facebook players is in the documentary as well. The guy who was in charge of monetizing it for quite a while, and essentially said the same thing. You have to. This is never good for the general population if the goal of that company is to use its knowledge of you to manipulate you. And that's the problem that needs fixed.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I could, because I just get so obsessed with some of this stuff on more of a, like on a personal level, like an individual person to person basis. No, you can't stop using these things. And that is not a reasonable expectation at all. But in the interim, right?
I'm going to jump in real quick. I think people can stop using things like Facebook and Twitter. And those things are things we can stop using, and I think people probably should. I've gotten to the point where I'm very close to done with Facebook. I'm not off of Facebook, and I check it. I still check it probably once a day.
Wow, that's a lot more than I thought you were going to say. But
yeah, I know. I'm definitely not saying I've remotely given it up, but I can tell you, it has been quite a while since I spent more than 3 to 5 minutes looking at whatever's I have on there, whatever, notifications or whatever, and then I'm off of it. Like, guaranteed, I have not spent more than 5 minutes on it in a single day. And that's
right.
A small step.
That's no, that's fair enough. And actually, Dax Shepard on his podcast, Armchair Expert, talks with the CEO of Instagram, and Instagram seems to be a much more ethical company than any of the other ones out there, even though I think they might be creating the biggest problem with the jealousy thing. Like, everyone trying to get glamour shots of their life just destroys people's conception of self and what they've accomplished.
Right.
But the actual design of the company is kind of pretty moral. You should check it out. It's at least worth your time to listen to, whether you agree with the guy or not.
Right. I definitely do. I have not listened to that one. I should listen to it because, like, off the top of my head, Instagram is owned by Facebook. Like,
I know that.
Facebook's are the ones.
Yeah.
Okay. And like, you're not on Instagram.
I'm not.
But I'm quote unquote on it. I don't check it remotely every day, and I don't post ever. So
yeah, just once every 3 days. It's never on it. Just once every 3 days.
Every 3 days for sub 2 hours. But it's kind of, it looks a lot like Facebook now. You got the same targeted advertisements coming in every few that pull over from Facebook. So the stuff you look at cross-platform now does the exact same thing, and it has a lot more of these like suggested political stuff for me now and stuff. It's looking a lot like Facebook to me.
Okay, and that very well may be.
I would have to listen to that.
It was more the what they were trying to cultivate and feel-wise, what they were going for as a company. I'm not going to pretend that I agree with their policies at all, especially since I don't use Instagram at all. But what I was going to say was there's a huge topic here to delayed gratification and also believing that your choices can affect your mood and life satisfaction even when you don't feel the direct correlation. So let me explain what I mean by that. I'm just saying that when you wake up at 6:30 in the morning, it really sucks to get up at 6:30 in the morning or 5:30 in the morning or 4:30 in the morning, whatever early is for you. It's different for everybody. But if you wake up an hour earlier, get your nice cup of coffee, go for a walk, your enjoyment of that day is going to be pretty much consistently heightened, right? Like absolutely, you're going to have a better day. And the actual process of doing the hard things isn't what makes your day better. You don't actually feel the benefits, right? Like the same thing with, for some people, drinking alcohol or overeating. If you do that day after day after day after day, 12, 15, 20 days later, you start to be in a really crappy, horrible mood. And you don't really know why. Or the sunshine, like there's been studies done about getting outdoors and how much the sun affects your mood. We have to be a population of people who believe in that sort of good that we can't feel. But if you can get there, let me try to connect this back. Your ability to stay off of these social media services or totally change the way in which you interact with them. So I no longer get notifications from any service. I don't even get notifications from my email. I have to go check my email. You start to design these things to be tools the way that they're supposed to be used. And you have to believe that 10, 12, 20 days later, you're going to have a higher sense of life satisfaction. It doesn't mean getting off of YouTube right now is going to make you feel better. No, it's going to make you feel incredibly bored for a little while. But the benefits in the end might outweigh the time filling in the present.
Right. I mean, in a specific example, like if I choose to today not Instagram a picture of my awesome fried chicken meal that I got at this awesome restaurant down the road.
That sounds awesome.
It is awesome. And people, for today, I might feel kind of bad because people aren't going to know how awesome I am. And they're not going to be jealous of me, which they should be all the time.
Right.
But the issue is, a week down the line, I'm probably actually going to be happier because I don't give a crap if people are jealous of my meals anymore. I don't give a crap how many likes I got on that. I don't care who saw it. I am happy with my, you get more fulfillment out of your life, right? It's the self-fulfillment issue is what we kind of lose with social media, right? You get that temporary high of other people care about me, but you completely lose, do you like yourself? Do you care about yourself, right? And I mean, that's the delayed gratification thing we're talking about. I feel so much better if I only sleep for 8 hours, get up, have a cup of coffee, have a good breakfast. That evening, I feel so much better than if I sleep for 13 or 14 hours, which I absolutely incapable of doing. I feel like crap a few hours later. It's really a psychological problem, and it's so hard. That's brings us back to it's so hard to overcome.
Right, and that's the point. Is that solution is only for those willing to try it. Obviously, we are not going to get 350 million Americans to decide that they want to take their life into their own hands and live a fulfilled life of waking up an hour early and sleeping 8 hours a day. It's just not going to happen. But for those of you who really can test yourself on that, test yourself for it. Give it a week. Give it a week off of social media and see if you are genuinely more satisfied, or if you recognize some patterns in your life that you're like, well, what the crap? Like, why haven't I been doing different things, talking to more people that I'm actually, interested in talking to, and all that, stuff that everyone talks about. Now we're just sounding like old people sitting at McDonald's in the morning on Sundays.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we're in an interesting situation here, kind of being jammed in this millennial generation between. I mean, it's telling people to get off of it is bad for you. You tell that to people younger than us, and you kind of get the oh, you're getting old, eye roll, whatever. Like, yeah, we know we don't like it, but everybody's on it. It's not that bad. Like, we're gonna keep doing it, or like maybe not even saying it's not that bad, but it's like whatever. There's nothing we can do about it. It's life. You get that reaction from anybody younger. The people older are kind of like, oh yeah, we know how horrible it is, you kids and your social media, and then they spend 5 hours a day on Facebook or something.
Yeah,
like
but
that.
they might actually be using it better. Do you know what I mean? Like that's the frustrating thing is like you look at 50, 60, 70-year-olds and you're a little bit jealous because they're using it to genuinely connect with family and using it to, really understand what's happening to someone they care about, 1,000 miles away.
I mean, they were. I mean, that's certainly true. And now, but I mean, just in the last few years, you can bring up that just in the time they started making this documentary, the fake news problem is really just kind of popped up, and we've seen how it can really have a negative effect on the older generations.
Yeah, no, you're right. We are the strange generation to talk about this because we are literally the generation who went from when we were in elementary school, not that many people in high school had cell phones. Then when we were in, the end of elementary school, it was like, okay, most people had some sort of crappy cell phone.
Right.
And then in middle school, like the razors became popular.
We're not talking about the elementary school kids had some kind of cell phone.
No,
we're talking about the older, like young
the high
adults.
school and college. Yeah, the high school and college kids did. And then when we got to middle school, it's so crazy how this happened. Like it went from the razors to then the iPhones, and then nothing was the same since.
Right.
So by the time that you were in college and I was in high school, everybody had iPhones. And then the middle school kids started to get iPhones by the time I was probably a freshman in college. So we literally watched as tech. I know people a little bit older than us in their 40s like to say they watched it because they got to see the whole, 90s happen. But It was really like we were in the midst of what they were watching.
Right,
like,
exactly. We were the ones being
We
watched.
were living this sort of no cell phone, small cell phone, better cell phone, iPhone life. Like we got to see it all happen at the same time.
Yeah, and I mean that's if you're curious about what the distinction is between the millennial generation, so Gen Y, and then the newest, Gen Z, the youngest generation right now. The difference is who grew up with high-speed internet, social media, and smartphones, and who didn't really get those until they were entering adulthood, right? So millennials, and you are the actual, for what most people call 95 the cutoff, so you are the youngest, the youngest of the millennial generation right before Gen Z started. And it's like for me, we did not have high-speed internet at home until either the very end of my junior year of high school or the start of my senior year of high school was the first time I had high-speed internet, and I didn't have a cell phone until not a cell phone, sorry. I didn't have a smartphone with any access to social media or the internet until my senior year of high school. So that's the first time I had ever touched an iPhone, or owned an iPhone, was my senior year of high school. And so it's this really weird generation who's like watched it happen, and then suddenly became a part of it at the very, very end of it.
Think about how fast that came. Like when I was a junior and a senior, the conversation was, did your parents cheap out and get you the iPhone color? Or did they go up to like the 5 SE or whatever it was? Like that's just so crazy to think about how fast that went. Mm-hmm. But I think the speed is part of the fear, right? Like anything moving that quickly can obviously get out of hand so incredibly fast.
And as we're talking about, it did. I mean, that was the thing.
Right, exactly.
And my first social media was Facebook, and I signed up for it shortly after starting my senior year of high school. So, and then like that's part of what puts me firmly in millennial versus Gen Z is I was, essentially 18 years old. I was an adult when I got my first social media and when I started. So I didn't grow up on that. Yeah. It, obviously still matured after 18, but I was technically an adult before I had a smartphone, before I had social media, before I had any of that stuff. And yet the influence it's had on our generation, even not even getting it till we were late high school, college kids, has been enormous. and now we're seeing the effects of the kids who grew up on it, with the Gen Z having insanely high, mental health issues and suicidal issues, and stuff like that. So that's a real dark time to end it. That's a real dark place to end it.
Yeah, we said we always ended on the lighter side of things.
Yeah, we got to hit the lighter side before we go. But yeah, I mean, watch it. This is the lighter side. The lighter side is that there is this amazing 90-minute documentary on this problem, and it goes over it so well. And I mean, the lighter side is this stuff really isn't that hard to give up. I think the only problem is you have to put it past you. That's the challenge, is putting it past you. This kind of like, well, I'll just do a little bit less of it. I'll pay attention to the Apple puts the nice little how many minutes. I mean, Android does it too now. How many minutes have you been spending on each app? You know, just cutting down your time, your kids' time. I mean, so this is an interesting question. Before we end it, I mean, would you let your kids have social media? Would you give them that option? At what age would you let them do it? Like, what kind of freedom would you let your kids have if you had kids currently?
Yeah, no, I guess I'm probably getting to a sort of pretentious level of like community. Like I almost would not let my kids have any of it, and I'd almost like constantly be trying to get them involved in community activities and all this stuff that like when I was a teenager I thought was just like garbage. Like when the Obamas first started to talk about community, like that was a huge word that they would use on trying to convince, you know, different regions to gather around each other. I just like laugh like with a pretentious like, but like truly like I think what I would probably do is just, you know, the 60-year-old man at McDonald's thing of like force your kids to get involved with actual activities, make their experience with technology all about, you know, the cool part, the coding, make it about the, you know, yeah, they can play some video games because video games are awesome and the amount of time and energy it takes to build a video game. And then what do? You buy the game. You say, okay, here is my money. I am purchasing this game. I do not get any advertisements from you. Why? Because I have purchased the game with my money.
Right.
And then you let them play the game and you let them see how awesome tech is, but you just don't let them on this space where misinformation flies. Like that's the scariest part is I don't want my child at the dinner table telling me something is true that just is so fundamentally and obviously false.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is interesting because you and I have kind of different perspectives on social media too, because you have been really not on it, right? Essentially never had a Facebook.
Dark. I've been dark, people.
Yeah. I mean, somebody made a Facebook for him and sometimes relatives post on it thinking that it's actually him, but it's not.
I've never gotten any of your happy birthdays, Grandma.
So yeah, I mean, he's been completely dark on Facebook. You know, you've had Twitter intermittently.
Yeah, I've had enough anxiety and depression in my own life. I don't need any of that mixing into my. But
I mean, I see what you're going, and like even somebody I've been on all of them, not obsessively. You know, I'd say I've been.
You're obsessed with Reddit. Just
Reddit,
admit it. Just admit it to the fans.
Reddit doesn't manipulate you, Jared. It's not.
No, it just separates the a-holes from the non-a-holes. I've said this a million times.
Man, it's totally not good for a lot of reasons to be on Reddit. However, the information on Reddit is sorted just like TV or anything like that. It's sorted based on, you see stuff based on what everybody likes, right? What's popular with everybody. So you see populist information. You don't see the super targeted stuff. You don't see the extreme. I mean, I'm not saying there's nothing extreme, but that stuff isn't intentionally thrown in your face.
Yeah, and there's one other thing, and sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. There's one other part of this, since we've already gone on for much longer than we planned on going. There's one other part of this that separates us from other people, is that, and this definitely comes from a place of privilege, like we totally acknowledge that, but like we're not cheap when it comes to like how would we solve this problem. So I have no issues paying for better forms of social media,
right,
where there would be none of this advertisement problem. I have no problems paying for any service that I get. And that's not even like a moral thing where you pay for something you're using. It's just like an obvious thing. I would rather pay for the thing that keeps the advertisers at bay than I would, you know, get something for free, which just puts us, I think, in a small category of people. Like so many people love how free it is. They forgive the crappy way advertisements just pop up everywhere on the internet because it's free. Like it's just not worth, what you're getting is just not worth it being free in our opinion, but that makes us a little bit different, I think, than the average consumer.
Right. And I mean, that would certainly help with the problem. But I mean, you're still going to go back to, you can still cycle right back to the fact that if it's based, you know, even if I'm paying for the service, if it's still based off a system that wants to keep my eyes on the screen, we still kind of have an issue. Like if you pay for YouTube Premium right now, you're paying for something that is advertisement less, but they still use the same algorithm. So it's still potentially just as dangerous. Now, that being said, they're not as dependent, right? If something, you know, YouTube does it because they have both sides of the equation, right? But if you take away that advertising side entirely, you are correct that like you no longer, if I have a guaranteed monthly income from you as a subscriber, I don't have the need to target everything for you. I don't have the need to keep your eyes on the screen as much as humanly possible, like a Facebook or a free YouTube does. Netflix doesn't have that motivation. You can't stop looking at the screen, right?
Well, that's actually kind of interesting you point out Netflix, because I was actually going to go there, which is it's sort of the interesting little part of this where you do pay for it, and it is a little bit better, but it also uses some handy tricks to keep your attention. Namely the fact that it can throw out new content faster than you can say, holy crap, there's a new movie on Netflix. And also the fact that it auto plays the next show for you without you actively even having to say, hey, I want to watch that.
Right. It definitely still encourages laziness, and it still buys into your issue. Like your biggest issue with, or one of your biggest issues with, the time stealing. It's still, Netflix is a big time stealer.
Yeah, I've got it almost, and there's a reason I mentioned Matthew McConaughey. I almost have like a crazy level of, I think everyone should be living like a purpose-driven life. So I got to admit that maybe I have a little bit of a ridiculous thing going on there too, where I just don't think any moment of your day should be wasted. I do have a huge issue there, but
right. And obviously the Netflix helps with me a lot, because I'm not as
you love wasting time. One of your favorite things to do is waste time.
I don't care about wasting time, but I care about being
efficient with how you waste time.
Intrinsically manipulated. Gosh.
No, but I do think there's another part of Netflix which is really interesting on the other side, which is just think of the design of it. Netflix is beautifully designed. It's easy to navigate. No pop-ups come up telling you that you can buy the newest backpack made of sustainable material in France, but they want exclusive offer to buy online. Like none of that just garbage pops up. And you feel a little bit better about paying for something like that,
right,
because it is well made, well finished. It feels almost like an Apple-like product, right, in that regard. So,
right. And I mean that's it's the Apple model. You can the solution is kind of not, and you hit the whole problem is because not everyone can afford to not be marketed to and manipulated, and that kind of, we can go. I don't want to go down that whole other rabbit hole, but the point is that one of the solutions is companies that do overcharge you a little bit, like an Apple. But because of that, Apple is slick, efficient. I'm not just talking about their operating system. I'm talking about in general as a company, right? They don't, you can say, oh, there's Apple everything, but honestly, they don't saturate the market with products, right? They make a few products. They make them incredibly well made. They overprice them, yes, but then that's it, right? You buy that product, you live with that product, and they've really been taking, they're supposedly developing a search engine that is not going to market, that is going to 100% keep what you search and what you're looking at on their browser. Well, they already have a browser, but it would tie into their search engine to keep that to itself, right? It's not going to sell that information. It's not going to do that. Like I said, there's rumors that they're doing a social media that kind of would be in the same ballpark, and so hopefully, that's a fingers crossed, a purely theoretical solution. But at the end of the day, we just be aware. Watch this documentary. I would encourage you to go further than that. Watch.
Listen to Tristan Harris on your way to work. Watch. Listen to the Armchair Experts one. I think was probably because I actually did listen to the Joe Rogan one as well.
Okay.
I think it was the most succinct one. I thought he got at all of his points relatively quickly. Dax and Monica, who's the other host of the show, they do a good job being a little bit lighthearted. I think it's just worth your time. You could watch it over a week's time, just driving back and forth to a job.
And you can definitely watch these podcasts before you watch listen to those at work, on your way back at home, during your commute, whatever you're able to do. But you can do that before you watch the documentary and then go to the documentary. It doesn't really matter. But yeah, consume this material and then tell people about it. Tell people. And you said about, you're not sure you would let your kids be on social media. I honestly get to the point where I think I might be on the same page. As a user of social media who doesn't like it and who's desperately trying to cut back as much as I humanly can, if I had kids, I'm not sure I would want to throw them down this rabbit hole yet, or allow them to go down this rabbit hole. And I'm a pretty laid-back person, and I imagine myself to be a pretty laid-back parent and letting my kids make their own decisions. But this is one that seems so dangerous and so all-consuming, so manipulative that it'd be a hard thing to say, go ahead and go down this rabbit hole. And so, we're not telling anybody how to parent, but, not letting your kids be on social media, I think, is worth the conversation at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, his name is Tristan Harris. look him up. You might think it's Tristan. Honestly, if you're reading it, it really doesn't matter a whole lot, does it? No,
it's spelled
absolutely.
Tristan. It looks Tristan.
He looks like a Tristan, which I think doesn't matter either. But
right, definitely.
All right. Well, thank you for taking the time to listen to the Lyder Side podcast. If you didn't listen to this all the way through, you're not hearing this right now. So whatever. But we have no interest here in changing what you think, just how we all think. Have a great day, everybody.